Hi everyone. This video is going to be an overview of the lower body flexibility portion for this week. So the first movement is a horse stance, otherwise known as a goddess pose in yoga. If you're on a yoga mat, you can think about pointing your feet towards the front corners. Otherwise, you want to think about a 45-degree angle with your feet. Abs are engaged, glutes are nice and engaged, pushing your hips forwards. You want to think about big toes pressing into the ground. Bend your knees and then sink down, trying to keep your torso nice and upright, knees pressing backwards till you find that nice groin stretch. And then just calmly sit there and breathe. Keeping the outside edge of your glutes squeezed real tight, abs are real tight. Feeling that groin stretch and breathing. Common mistake on this one is when you're coming down, you let the torso go forwards, right? And that's going to drastically change the hip positioning, make this not quite as intensive. So if you're finding that you feel like you're falling forwards, what you can do is get up close to a wall. So have the wall almost touching your back, up nice and tall, and then just sink down right next to that wall and try not to touch it. That's a really good way to get into that stance. Make sure you're keeping your spine nice and upright. Next up, you ground Spreadfoot Bends. So you want to get into a nice spread foot position here on the ground. Have your weight nice and centered through your sit bones, so you don't want to be rounded back. You want to try as much as possible to have your torso upright. If you struggle with that, it's all right to bend the knees a little to get that nice upright posture, or to push forwards with your hands and just sit in here. If you're finding that you're struggling to get into that positioning, just sitting in this position, getting that stretch, hamstrings, groin, that will be sufficient. If you do find that you can sit here comfortably, nice and upright, what you're going to work on is hinging forwards at your hips. So instead of the more common toe touch, where you allow your whole spine to flex and you're just trying to get that range, what we're going to be working on for this is thinking about hinging forwards. So you're keeping yourself nice and tall and not allowing yourself that flexion in the upper torso. You're bending, thinking about as much as possible, trying to rotate your pelvis. So on this one, oftentimes you'll feel a lot of stretch in this portion of the back, and that's totally right. So just nice calm breathing towards there, right? Both sides, getting that angled one, thinking about bringing your chest towards the ground, and then you want to go forwards, same thing, keeping your head extended, trying to bring that down. You can allow your feet to roll inwards, or you can really try and fight and keep them twisted out to get a little bit more stretching in different parts. So feel free to try out both. But the goal here is to keep that extension and hinge forwards as opposed to getting that giant bend. So make sure you're keeping yourself tall. Next one is reaching child's pose. So to really get this into the low back and the hips, we're going to get really strict in how you get into that base position. So toes together, knees nice and wide. Keep an arch in the low back, abs are tight. You're going to sit, pushing the hips back, keeping that as much as you can that entire time. You should feel a lot of tension in the groin and hips while you're in here. Squeezing, again, that outside edge of your hips from that position, trying to hold everything. Slide your hands forwards until you get into the standard child's pose position. From here, you're going to walk your hands over towards one side and think about really pushing through that opposite hand, so the side you're bending away, the opposite side of the side you're bending towards. So if you're bending right, it's your left hand. Pushing that hand as far away as you can, trying to feel that nice lat stretch. And again, like in normal child's pose, nice deep breathing. After you hit that 5 to 7 breaths or 30 seconds, however you want to count it, back to neutral, and then over towards the other side. Again, trying to keep thinking about your rotating forwards, bending at the pelvis, so you get that big stretch back here, as opposed to rounding with that low spine. That's not to say there's anything wrong with doing the rounded back version. That's more for relaxing and allowing your lower back to decompress. If you're trying to actually increase the tension and length of musculature in your hips, keeping that tension and really pivoting and thinking about you're trying to spin your pelvis, that's what's going to help build that range of motion. So feel free to try out both methods, and if you do feel like your back is very stiff or tender that day, feel free to not be as strict with it. Next up is a prone quad stretch. So you're going to be in the prone position on your belly, arms are relaxed. From here, you're going to push your hips into the ground, pull your rib cage down so you get that real strong ab lock, glutes are tight. You're going to reach your hand back and grab onto your foot. Now, if you can't comfortably do this, you can try using a towel, a t-shirt, a belt. A belt works really well. You can just slip it around your foot, and using that to pull the foot up, getting that flexion. You can also try doing a standing quad stretch and driving the knee back a little bit more. See if you can open that up to get into this position. If you can comfortably get here though, and you're finding not a lot of tension build up in the hip flexor down to the quad, you can try for both legs at once, getting that flexion, and holding that tension and just pushing your hips down, right? The more you think about squeezing your butt into the ground, the more stretch you're going to get. It also is very necessary to have that compression to keep your back safe, so you don't use the low back muscles to tighten up to get that range of motion. So really focus on that hip drive when you're doing that stretch. The last one is the happy baby stretch. So starting position on the ground, pelvis nice and weighted, abs tight. You're going to bring your knees up, keeping the pelvis nice and weighted. From here, hands go on the inside of the knees. You can either grab on your big toes or the outside edge of your foot. Really, that is a personal preference. They both are going to be very effective. I like doing the toe grab. And from there, right, keeping weight on the pelvis, you're going to try and point your feet up to the ceiling and then pull your knees down towards the ground. Really focus on trying not to take weight off of your pelvis, right? So you don't want to round up so that you get weightless back here, right? You're trying to think about squishing down into the ground there as you bring this up. And again, nice calm breathing, pushing the knees wide with the elbows as you pull them down. You should feel this in the groin, the back, the hips. If you're finding that you can comfortably be here and you want a little bit more of a stretch, what you can do is, again, keeping weight on the pelvis, you can push through the heels, try to get leg extension, and then pull that down, right? That's going to get into the hamstrings more. You're still getting that groin stretch. You're just also then getting nice big hamstring stretch while you do this. The important thing to think about is weight on the pelvis, right? So if you're doing this and you're right here, right, knees are nice and together, your feet are not too far forward, and you can keep weight down, and you feel a lot of stretch in this position, then this is your version of happy baby, right? This is where you find that tension and that stretch, right? If going upwards means you rock up like this to try and point your feet up, you don't want to do that. You want to try and make sure you can maintain that tension in the low back as you come up, because otherwise you're going to be putting curvature in the lower spine, but that is not helpful for getting the actual stretch that you're trying to achieve. So for all of these, make sure you can comfortably breathe when you're in the end position, getting into that stretch, and try to have fun with it and make sure that you can relax as much as possible. All right, some of these stretches you have to be very active in certain body parts, but try to be really cognizant of where you're trying to stretch and trying to actively release that portion. So have fun, and I hope you enjoy them.